All right. Ahead of introducing and turning over the mic, I will just take a moment to acknowledge where we have gathered today. And on behalf of the Center, we honor the ancestry, heritage, and gifts of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We recognize that Brown University is situated on Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 land, and that this is the land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are grateful to work and live on these lands, and we're grateful to have you all here today to share in this research and seminar series entitled Educational Preparedness for Correctional Nurses as it relates to the Legalities of Nursing Practice. So Ashley Lemus is an MPN student. She received her Bachelor of Science in Psychiatric Nursing from Brown University in 2014. She has spent her career thus far working in acute psychiatry and correctional nursing. Her passion remains in the correctional setting, and she's currently employed at the Regional Psychiatric Center in Saskatoon full-time, and the Saskatoon Correctional Center on a casual basis. Ashley obtained her legal nursing consulting certification in 2022, and she has an interest in the legal aspects of nursing practice. These interests combined have led her to the topic of correctional nurses' experiences that we're going to hear about today. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about exploring the perception and experiences of nurses transitioning into a correctional service Canadian federal institution, an interpretive description qualitative study. Oh, why won't this? There we go, click. Okay, I have my own land acknowledgement. So as we gather here today, I want to acknowledge that I personally am located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, on the traditional homeland of Treaty 6 territory. Treaty 6 territory encompasses the lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respect to the First Nation and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. So a bit of the outline for today. I'm going to discuss why this topic is important to me and why it warrants further investigation. In order to do that, I must first define what it means to be a correctional nurse versus a forensic nurse, because the terms are used interchangeably amongst the current research, but are in fact two separate nursing specialties. Once we have an understanding of those terms, I will discuss the literature review and gaps, my proposed research question to address that gap, and the conceptual framework and methodology I will use in order to answer the research question. I will also identify recruitment strategies and ethical approval requirements. So the terms correctional nurse and forensic nurse, like I said, are used interchangeably amongst the research studies, and they seem to have taken on the same meaning despite their obvious differences. This confusion deepens when specialized units structured to care for the offender populations are termed forensic units. The term forensic psychiatry continues to add to confusion in terminology. So Canada has an association for forensic nurses called the Canadian Forensic Nurses Association. They use the definition of forensic nurse set out by the International Association for Forensic Nurse, which states a forensic nurse is a registered or advanced practice nurse who has received specific education and training. Forensic nurses provide specialized care for patients who are experiencing acute and long-term health consequences associated with victimization of violence or have unmet evidentiary needs relative to having been victimized or accused of victimization. In addition, forensic nurses provide consultation and testimony for civil and criminal proceedings relative to nursing practice and opinions rendered regarding findings. Forensic nursing care is not separate and distinct from other forms of medical care, but rather integrated into the overall care needs of individual patients. The Canadian Forensic Nurses Association developed their standards of forensic nursing care in 2022 and acknowledged that forensic nursing is a specialty with a unique body of professional knowledge, and noted the importance that forensic nurses pursue the ongoing learning necessary to build and maintain competency as a specialist within the nursing within nursing to provide the forensic care needed by their client population. There are current forensic nursing certifications offered through British Columbia Institute of Technology, and once completed, nurses are awarded their forensic nurse examiner certification. So in contrast to forensic nurse, the International Association of Forensic Nurses has developed a definition for correctional nurses, noting them as the first healthcare professional to see an inmate about a medical condition. Correctional nurses must often work closely with correctional officers in situations such as emergencies in the housing units or monitoring inmates for medical attention. These nurses are challenged to provide maximum health care in a setting with a mission and designed for other purposes, security and public safety. Therefore, resources can be limited and critical thinking is required to be successful in rendering effective patient care. Prison nursing involves a longer contact with the patient population, and the International Association for Forensic Nurses argued that the autonomous nature of the role and the need for excellent assessment skills warrants experience in general nursing practice before entry into the specialty. But interestingly, they have not made this mandatory for hire, nor have they created resources to better prepare the nurse prior to entering the correctional nurse workforce. So Canada currently has no definition for the correctional nurse and does not recognize it as a nursing specialty. This has hindered the development of knowledge-based correctional nursing practice, quality work environments, professional development of correctional nurses, and progression of healthcare policy within prisons. For the purpose of my study, I will be using the term correctional nurse as it applies to the correctional nurse environment. So what does the literature say about correctional nursing preparedness? First, that there is a lack of education available to correctional nurses. So this literature review was conducted using the databases CINAHL, EBSCOhost, Wiley, PubMed, PsycArticles, HealthSource, Sage Collection, Academic Search Premier, and PsycInfo. The sources reviewed consisted of quantitative, qualitative, and gray literature. So Jecker in his study argued that healthcare professionals trained in hospitals are inadequately prepared to work in the prison context, given not only the medical problems, but the distinct social and legal complexities added on to the patient's circumstances. Therefore, healthcare professionals working in corrections must have specialized training and competence in order to ensure equivalence. Lack of education and preparedness was noted in the findings of multiple sources. Barr in 2019 explored nurses' experiences adapting their skill set to fit within the restrictions of the correctional environment and the lack of resources available. Four themes expressed were working in a challenging environment, the need for specialty knowledge, pre-exposure to aggression and resilience as a protective factor, and the importance of effective teamwork. The iron bar environment does not permit nurses to establish an appropriate therapeutic relationship with their patients, which gives rise to ethical issues that are not found in hospitals. Correctional nurses are responsible for a large number of incarcerated people. Saskatoon Correctional Center has 437 inmates to only 6 nurses for reference, thus jeopardizing the quality of care given due to time restraints. In addition, correctional officers' attitudes and language was identified as a barrier to care, and nurses noted frustration with the societal norms because they could not show compassion or they feared being labeled thug huggers. Barr continued that arguing that further research is required to understand the influence of individual, team, and leadership factors on the use of restrictive practices in this unique setting. Correctional officers were identified as persons who do not have access to an inmate's medical file, but that are in the need-to-know realm when it comes to maintaining inmate safety. Alger in 2015 identified the pressures of correctional nurses' experiences from senior management to prevent a death in custody. This pressure is taken into consideration when a decision whether to breach inmate confidentiality is required. This information is helpful to my study topic when inquiring about correctional nursing preparedness as it relates to maintaining inmate confidentiality among a multidisciplinary team and the pressures they are faced with when attempting to remain compliant to their standards of care set forth by their regulatory bodies. Alger noted implications for future research should suggest a need to improve the practices and attitudes correctional nurses have towards confidentiality in prisons given the unique multidisciplinary team involved. Confidentiality was also identified as a concern in White's 2014 study, and participants described that privacy does not exist within the prison context. Results indicated that keeping inmates safe from others and themselves is a greater concern within the prison context than in the community, and that healthcare providers had been acculturated by the prison context by adopting custodial values and norms in place of healthcare values and norms. Care provided is fear-driven, and participants acknowledge that the legal ramifications of a death in custody is not worth the risk of not responding with the most restrictive practices, which include isolation cells. Finally, there exists a preconceived stigma surrounding the prison nursing role. To combat this, Hunt, in his 2020 study, developed a Prison Insight Day, which was designed to promote positive prison affiliations in hope to educate and encourage future student nurses to accept practicum placements and promote future employment. All data gathered from the day was thematically analyzed, resulting in 4 themes: pre-placement curiosity, escalating admission anxiety, calming down inside, and post-placement decision-making. The recommendation is to continue to offer insight days as exposure has had positive effects on students' decision for future placements. The literature continues on to say that there is role confusion amongst the correctional nurse. In terms of the nurse's relationship with the prison officers, there is felt to be a professional divide in terms of underpinning philosophies of practice that is attributing to role confusion and moral and ethical dilemmas. The constraints of providing care in a setting which has security as its main focus is a major challenge to the nursing profession. Dhaliwal in 2021 argued that caring in custody creates role conflict, invites ethical issues, and professional dilemmas. Opposition between custody roles and caring roles exists as it relates to the duty of the nurse to follow correctional services authorities' rules while upholding the duty to care. Yet resolving this tension between custody and caring requires educational intervention and more research. Holmes suggested that there exists a paradox where nurses function as peace officers, which illustrates the political aspects of correctional nursing care. Nurses must show initiative and authority when reinforcing medication compliance against community treatment orders, as stated by the judge. Nurses also showcase their power when reporting medication trading, medication diversions, and medication misuse in the form of disciplinary reports that can result in institutional charges against the patient, causing tension on the therapeutic relationship. The author noted that obedience is more spontaneous with officers present, one of the ways that officer presence affects the nursing practice. Holmes continued, arguing that nurses exert 3 types of power over inmates: coercion power, disciplinary power, and pastoral care power. These power roles are unique to an inmate-nurse relationship. This particular patient has lost control and power over many of their life's decisions, and the role of the nurse is to be a patient advocate, which can create conflict when assuming a role of power. Domingue in 2022 explored nurses' awareness with the severity of the legal ramification of nursing practice and identified a clear need to raise nurses' awareness related to the political and ethical ramifications of clinical practice within the domain of correctional psychiatry. Findings suggest that correctional nurses were unaware of the extent to which they would be directly involved in the judicial system. Their patient reports, primary meeting reports, and interdisciplinary meeting reports are all used during parole hearings or investigations. Further findings suggested that nurses see themselves as extensions of the correctional environment, with the aim of their practice to bring the patient to accept and internalize the decisions and recommendations of the parole board hearings. This suggested that nurses aim to protect the institution and not the patient. Nurses are also in conflict with themselves when determining whether or not they need to know the criminal history of their patients in order to provide appropriate care. Biases and stigma go unchecked. So some background information as to why a focus on correctional nursing. During my own transition into the correctional nurse role, I experienced a lack of preparedness in terms of security awareness, for example, weapons and security protocols, working with a multidisciplinary team that included legal and security representatives, including lawyers, parole officers, judges, correctional managers, and education related to adapting nursing practice to fit within the restrictions and limited resources of the secured environment. Over time, newly hired nurses would voice the same concerns I had. In addition to this, I came to realize that it did not matter if the new hire was a newly graduated nurse or a nurse with many years of experience from a different practice area. They were voicing the same concerns related to the uniqueness of the correctional nurse role and felt ill-prepared prior to commencing. To add to context of the correctional environment, Commissioner's directives have been included. Commissioner's directives, or CDs, are the Correctional Service Canada's federal workplace policies. The two I have included are CD 567, specifically chosen to provide context. It explains that the nurse is required to do things out of the normal healthcare setting. This includes submitting a statement observation report or an SOR report. This report must include the nurse's involvement in an incident or code and what occurred. However, the nurse must be cognizant not to include any patient confidential information, as this report is being submitted to the correctional manager of the institution who does not have access to such information. Another reason this CD provides good context in the correctional environment is it reminds the public that healthcare staff can only make healthcare recommendations for treatment interventions to the correctional manager and cannot enforce them. This is especially interesting when considering sending an inmate to hospital via ambulance in emergency situations. The inmate may be coding and requiring immediate medical intervention outside of the resources offered within the institution, but only the correctional manager can approve the transfer of an inmate to a public hospital. This requires that the correctional manager ensures it is safe to do so by ensuring there's enough correctional officers to accompany the transfer of the inmate to the hospital without putting the public at risk, and that the institution is operating in a safe manner sufficient to send an inmate to hospital. These are not situations a nurse working outside of Correctional Service Canada would have to consider, nor are they trained in prior to entering the Correctional Service Canada workforce. Lastly, I've included CD 800 to provide context regarding the general overview of what services healthcare workers offer within the Correctional Service Canada environment. This policy provides perspective to the public on what would be considered a minor detail in the hospital setting, but is an important factor in the correctional setting. An example of this is the simple idea of providing correctional healthcare staff with a space in which to conduct assessments and provide healthcare in a safe yet confidential manner. Without forgetting, all assessment rooms are fully visible to security correctional officers, meaning all the walls are in fact windows. Needles, medications, dressing supplies such as alcohol swabs and bandage scissors must all be stored in a secure manner so as not to be accessible to the inmate, meaning with lock and key. Even items as simple as a pen must always be accounted for, as the ink can be used for tattoos and the barrel turned into a weapon. This policy also serves as a reminder to the public about things taken for granted, such as the ability to purchase over-the-counter medications, which is prohibited in prison. Limitations and restrictions like this within the correctional institution hinders the inmate from being proactive in their healthcare journey, and minor healthcare concerns such as a headache require the inmate to request Tylenol from the nurse. As the nurse is required to complete a pain scale and full assessment related to such a request, time and resources are not used appropriately. So, speaking to the gap in research, there are clearly identified implications for future research in the topic of correctional nursing. Current research gaps include the working relationship dynamic between officer and nurse, correctional nurses' expectation and preparedness in legal documentation and involvement in the judicial system, and educational awareness surrounding the security risks and protocols that directly impact nursing practice. Woods and Pertinelli-Taylor in 2022 noted the need for ongoing professional development and research in this niche area of practice remains a current professional issue, and further research and curriculum development related to the Indigenous population, professional role identity, and the interpretation and implementation of nursing research related to the correctional nursing environment is needed. This solidifies that current nursing curriculums are not meeting the needs of correctional nurses to adequately prepare them for their specialized role. So, speaking to the chosen conceptual framework for my study, I have chosen the guiding framework of Schlossberg's transition theory, specifically because she focused her theory on adult life transitions and acknowledged the difference and impact subtle life transitions such as career changes can have on adult well-being. Schlossberg felt that it is not the transition itself that is of primary importance, but rather how the transition fits within an individual stage, situation, and style at the time of transition. Schlossberg defined adaptation to transition as the process during which an individual moves from being totally preoccupied with the transition to integrating the transition into his or her life. She identified 3 stages of transition, which included moving in transition, moving through transition, and moving out of transition. 3 major sets of factors that influence adaptation to transition include the characteristics of that transition, of the pre- and post-transition environment, and the characteristics of the individual experiencing the transition. Factors that affect adaptation or the characteristics of transition include role change, source of change, timing, onset, duration, and degree of stress. Most transitions have both negative and positive outcomes in terms of emotions felt. The environment also plays a role in affecting a positive outcome and smooth transitions, especially when evaluating interpersonal supports, institutional supports, and physical setting in which the transition is taking place. The identification of the effect the environment role has on transition and the focus on adult workplace transitions makes Schlossberg's theory of transition an appropriate conceptual framework for my study. My research study has a focus on adult nurses transitioning into the correctional environment, and when applying this theory, focuses on their experiences moving in, moving through, and moving out of transition by attempting to understand their educational preparedness, orientation experience, legal and ethical dilemmas experienced related to nursing practice, and their experience moving into a role that works so closely with security disciplines. Oops, how do I go back? Okay, there we go. What is the research question? The research question I'm seeking to answer is what factors promote or limit the preparedness of nurses in their practice as they transition into the correctional environment? Factors specifically that I want to be able to ask about are things such as prior correctional specific education, experience working with a security dynamic, experience with role confusions, preparedness for Board of Investigations, and experience with orientation. So the chosen methodology. Because I am wanting to ask about numerous factors and their impact on one specific area, interpretive description is the best fit for my study as it allows me to do this. Thorne in 2004 argues that there is a renewed call for rigor and validity in qualitative research so that results can be effectively applied and realistically adopted into nursing practice. The authors provide three philosophical underpinnings for this research design and recognize the foundation of interpretive description is the smaller scale qualitative investigation of clinical phenomena of interest for the purpose of capturing themes within subjective perceptions and generating a description capable of informing clinical understanding. The authors explain the difference between interpretive description and other qualitative methodologies is that it assumes the nurses are rarely satisfied with description alone and are continuously exploring explanations that may yield application implications. The product of interpretive description accounts for the inevitable individual variations amongst thematic patterns and commonalities of the phenomenon that is being studied. So the method of data collection. The primary source of data collection will be one-on-one confidential audio recorded interviews with approximately 10 to 20 participants or until saturation is reached. Secondary source of data collection will include educational resources that assisted in the preparedness of nurses transitioning into the correctional work environment and gray literature such as policies to inform practice. Recruitment strategies. A poster will be created by the researcher outlining recruitment criterion and the proposed study. The Chief of Health Services will be asked to disperse this poster via email to nurses who currently are employed at the Regional Psychiatric Center in Saskatoon. Respondents will be asked to contact the researcher with their interest in participating in the study. Ethical approval must be obtained by the Brandon University Research Ethics Committee and the National Headquarters External Research Review Committee for Correctional Service Canada, which is submitted online. In conclusion, interpretive description will be utilized in this research study as it allows for multiple factors to be explored and findings adopted into practice. Correctional nursing has a limited body of research literature and gaps remain surrounding the understanding of what factors limit or promote preparedness in nurses transitioning into the correctional nursing role. And I have some references. I think I sped through that a little bit, but that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashley. I am just going to stop the recording and then we can open the floor for questions and take it from there.